Welcome back. Part two of our introduction to the week 5 activities. I'm excited to talk to you about it, so let's just jump on board. In the second module, what I want to do is work on understanding and overcoming resistance to reform. We're thinking about these two objectives in this half of the learning modules for this week. I'm going to ask you to read chapters 4 and 5 out of Larrabee's Someone Has to Fail book. Again, the most depressing title that's out there, but these are really interesting chapters talking about ways that organizations and classrooms can resist reform. One of the things that I want you to really focus on is this idea of what makes resistance possible. There are obviously structures around educational organizations and assumptions and institutionalized norms that make resistance not only possible, but sometimes inevitable, depending on how you set up your reform or the educational system that it's being implemented in. But there are also identifiable characteristics that lead to that kind of resistance. And so what you get to do in this Larrabee reading, or these Larrabee readings, since it's 2 chapters, is really think about what are the ways that Larrabee identifies resistance. What are the factors or the characteristics of resistance that occur in these 2 chapters, looking at either organizational or classroom resistance? And how do we articulate that? Again, we're trying to identify what the obstacles are. These would be threats, perhaps, if you're doing obstacles and threats, if you're doing some sort of a SWOT analysis. Weaknesses, strengths, opportunities, and threats. Weaknesses and threats. There's the SWOT. Anyway, you're thinking about the resistance to reform. And so what are the articulated characteristics? Then I want you to take a look at this quick read. It's a very short article called "Fewer Americans Are Majoring in Education, but Will Students Pay the Price?" And as you can see, when you click on it, it's a very short article. This will take you, 2 minutes to read if you are, take your time. And where I think it really gets interesting is from this section and down, because the author of this short article starts to articulate what are some of the reasons why there might be a teacher shortage. And they aren't all reasons that have to do with things that public school educators or administrators can actually change or manipulate. Some of those things are outside of the scope of control or responsibility that public school teachers, educators, administrators, staff have. And they do a nice job of really highlighting those. They don't necessarily explain what they are, but they highlight them. And so I really like for you to take a look at that, because I think this quick read can suggest, or you can extrapolate, what might be some strategies to solve the teacher shortage problem. This is an issue that we keep coming back to and trying to merge it with our understanding of human capital and school reform. So if we're talking about teacher shortages in particular, and we talked in our week 4 live discussion that some of these issues are economic or cultural or social, and they're outside of the purview of education, but still, what are some potential solutions, or what are ways that schools and school districts can ameliorate, in other words, make better or improve upon the problems that exist? Then I'd like for you to take a close look at this case study. This is a case study called "The Campaign for Human Capital at the School District of Philadelphia." And when you click on it, this is it right here. You might have read other case studies from the Public Education Leadership Project at Harvard University. They published quite a few, a decade or so ago, that are still available on their website. And by the way, if you haven't already, if you click on it and then you go, I think if you do this, it's enough. And you just click on that. Look at that. You get to their website. This is just, for fun. And you can find more resources, more cases. Here's a list of all the cases that are available from them. You might want to take a look at those sometime if you haven't already. They're pretty interesting, and they give you a lot of insight into what some problems related to education are that you might want to address. Anyway, this one specifically focuses on human capital, and I want you to think about teacher recruitment, retention, and professional development as part of the strategy that this school district used. Now, the Philadelphia School District is obviously different in many ways from the school districts that you might encounter here in Texas, or especially in West Texas, and that's understandable. However, some core factors that are important to remember is that Socioeconomic, racial and ethnic, and gender stratification or inequalities are relevant in all of the districts we might be looking at. And in particular, urban and rural tend to go to the extremes of inequality in those two areas. So there are many times more overlaps between the kinds of contextual conditions that school districts in urban and rural areas have to face than there are between urban and rural versus suburban. So think about that as you're going through this. I want you to remember a key from the overview of this week is that the key for school reformers and educators like us is to understand or predict potential resistance and identify the factors that make reforms a success or a failure. We're trying to look for the things that can either hurt us or help us. All right. And then you choose the factors that lead to success and you emphasize them or increase them. And you identify the factors that tend to lead to failure and you revise them or eliminate them. So we're able to use this case study as a way to identify what we as educational leaders should understand or use to predict potential resistance and identify, I just said that, identify them. So then we want to emphasize and increase those factors that lead to success and revise or eliminate those factors that lead to failure. I want you to look at this case study and see, first of all, how did the educational leaders in the school district of Philadelphia emphasize and increase the factors leading to success and revise and eliminate the factors more likely to lead to failure. I also want you to see if you can figure out how they identified what those factors were or are. You told me in class when we met live during week 4 that you have experience using case studies, and so you're familiar with that approach. Just in case you want to talk about it more or think about it more, I have a template here that I've used with previous classes when we've talked about cases. It uses Bowman and Deal's 4 frames, which if you're not familiar with the 4 frames, you can ignore this for now. If you are familiar with the 4 frames, and I hope you are, then you could think about structural, human resource, political, and symbolic factors or hypotheses that might be able to explain why what happens in this case study happens. Anyway, it's optional. It's there for you if you want to take a look at it and if it would help you. If you really either are sleepy or you want to be sleepier or you just have a whole lot of time on your hands and you love watching me talk on screen, I have a short video that overviews sort of how to use this template, but it's certainly optional. The main thing is that you take a look at this case study, you read through it, and you do this part. Okay. For the application activities, you have 2 obvious things. One is make sure you submitted your first project installment assignment by Tuesday, September 25th. You do that obviously on the link up here. Oops, right here, first project installment due. I talked about that in the first half of our intro. The second thing is to post to the discussion board. You have 3 different prompts you can use for this week. You can respond to all 3. You can pick one and go from there, but you have lots of opportunities for posting. You've been doing a really stellar job in your initial posts, and that's something that I want to commend you on. So yay for you guys. What I'd like for you to improve on is the way that you challenge each other to grow and to learn and to articulate those ideas. So your initial posts tend to be really strong. Your follow-up posts, while there have been some strong showings, they tend to be more like applause than they are like being constructively critical and pushing each other to know or understand or explain even more. And that's one of the things that if we were in a classroom setting every week, we could do very easily because we're sitting around a table facing each other. It's harder to do asynchronously. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to have some asynchronous interaction. And so what I've done is I've devised a little structure for our discussion board this week. And let me explain to you what that looks like. Essentially, you're going to be working in smaller groups on the discussion board this week. And so when you go to our discussion board, you'll see that there are 4 different threads that I've formed. One for Heather D and Stacy, one for David, Kimberly, and Jonathan, one for Julie, Gabe, and Dana, one for Dwayne, LaShonda, and Heather N. And so you will be posting almost exclusively within these these weeks. You can, of course, read and comment in the other ones if you'd like. But what I'm going to ask you to do is specifically work with your colleagues, your classmates in your thread at first. So, for example, look for your name in the thread for week 5 discussion group. Let's say that you are Heather, Heather D and Stacy. So find yourselves, you're in this top thread. And let me see if I can, let me pause for a second. Okay, I just split the screen so I could go back and forth a little more easily. So here we have the threads in the discussion board. Here we have the instructions. So let's say we're Heather D and Stacy. So here's what would happen. And I'll just use one, I'll go through it for one person. Look for your name in the thread for your week 5 discussion group. Hey, Heather D, you found your name. In the smaller group, so you click on here and then you post a response that's your initial post. In the smaller group, please initially post as you normally would. So Heather makes a post. But then in your smaller group, also please respond at least twice on each group member's own thread. So you should be going back and forth on this thread for each person's initial post. Heather initially posts. Then Stacy, she does 3 things in her response to Heather's post. She restates what she understood Heather to have said. She either agrees and supports with Heather's statement with new evidence, or she politely disagrees using evidence. And then finally, Stacy would post a question about Heather's point that requires Heather to provide new information or perhaps take a different perspective in her answer. So you want to think about a question that would really challenge your partner in this case. Then, after Stacy has responded, Heather, and I haven't written this part in here, so this takes place sort of in the middle of bullet 3 and Stacy's second response. Heather would then respond to Stacy's post. So Heather initially posts, Stacy responds. Heather responds to the post either by answering this question or saying, Stacy, you're crazy. Of course I said it this way. Whatever the response that Heather has to Stacy. Then Stacy's second response is less structured and should either acknowledge that that she understands what Heather's saying now. Thank you for the clarification. Or Stacy might say, you know what, Heather, you still haven't answered my question. And, I know it's a hard question. And here's maybe why it was hard to answer. And that's it. Then you can walk away. And then you do the same thing. Stacy would, do an initial post. Heather would be the first to respond. Stacy would respond to Heather. And then, you know what I mean? You do it for each person. So this isn't meant to be a difficult thing to do. This is meant to be a structure that will help all of us have more interaction with each other, or in particular, you to have more interaction with each other within your small groups. Try to push each other and try to respond to each other more than once, so that you really have interaction going. If you do that, I'm not counting, did she do, first response point 2 in, blah, blah, blah in this thread or not. I'm not tracking that. What I'm looking at is, can you generally engage each other in a way that is more than simply patting each other on the backs, but in a way that really pushes you and really requires the other person to think about what their post was and provide a response to your thoughtful comment. Okay. That's it. You can do that. You guys are good at this. And you're doing it in these small groups, so you only have to do it with a couple of people. In that first group with Heather and Stacy, it's just Heather and Stacy. Heather comments and responds to Stacy. Stacy comments and responds to Heather. If you're in a group with 3 people in it, then you're going to have to interact with 2 people rather than just 1, because you'll interact with your other posters in that group. But again, this isn't meant to suck up a lot of time. This isn't meant to be overwhelmingly complicated. This is just a way for you to talk to each other. Okay. So here's how you get there. Just click on the discussion for week 5 and post away. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys when we have our next live class. But in the meantime, I will eagerly await your posts in the thread. If you have any questions at all about what I'm asking you to do in terms of walking through the content in these different modules, or you just want to chat in the meantime, you can always contact me and I'd be happy to get together. All right,